All right, so aphorism 24. Let's see what I have on here. Um, yeah, I thought it was interesting how they talk about how in order to refine will to knowledge, sometimes you need the will to ignorance. Um, and that kind of makes the way that I see it maybe different from what Nietzsche sees is that you can't really specialize in everything. You kind of have to assume a lot of things so that you can delve deeper into certain aspects of something.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
makes
that's
sense.
like knowledge is a growing thing. You can only, it's not like you can just,
Know all,
unless,
right?
like, you may not come across some huge leap in the gap of knowledge unless you just like accidentally stumble across some crazy shit. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that you're working on and like, oh shit, this happened and boom, like there's some crazy leap that happens. But like normally it's like inch by inch, you know. So there's gonna be some, we start off ignorant and then we learn from that, like how many times you got to play with fire before you realize it's,
It hurts,
you know what
yeah.
I mean? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Shit like that.
But it's interesting how, like, in certain other areas, Nietzsche has spoken against specializations. Has I forget what he says about it, but it's almost like he almost puts it down as like a thing that scholars and whatnot do. But it's better to have it have kind of be open to everything and not be too specific to corner yourself too much. But it's interesting. Even in science, you can see that even though it's important to have generalists to kind of see the overall picture, we also need specialists to push the boundaries on those specific niches of understanding. So I personally think that we kind of do need both ignorance and ignorance so that we can specialize, but also we need people who know the general concepts, like how these fields tie together. Like Nietzsche himself is able to tie psychology, um, physiology, um, medicine, nutrition, all these concepts together in his writing. But each one of those are separate fields as well, and there's value in
Yeah,
kind of
I
doing
mean,
both.
well, Nietzsche, he says really like, limit what you read or like limit your field anyway. So that is a sort of specialization because
That's a good point.
in
So,
a way, because it's like, you don't want to read too much and of all this shit because, knowledge for its own sake is a snare. So, you know what I mean? So
mhm,
then
mhm.
you just start going too much into knowledge and that's when you just become the scholar, you just go out and collect knowledge and you don't do anything with it. It's like the dragon's holding you back. You have all the treasure, but you're just guarding it, you not utilizing it.
Never thought of it that way, but yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of generalists tend to be that. They're kind of like holders of knowledge of like, oh, this is what I know, but they don't try to specialize. They don't try to like push the boundaries of what more can we know with what we have, kind of thing. Which is which has its merits, but has its limitations. Like you said, of like you have to grow the fields.
I think he's
Anything?
also,
Yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead. I think he's also maybe saying that sometimes we have like what seems to be a growth in knowledge, but it's actually like we're adding errors. Like, for example, like physics and astronomy, we discovered certain truths, but then they weren't actually like completely true, but they were very simple and easy to understand, like circular orbits, for example. And then someone
Mhm.
had to come along later and say, no, actually the orbits are
Yeah,
elliptical.
exactly.
And like it keeps you're adding truths, but you're also like falsifying at the same time because this
Mhm.
makes it easier for us to understand. And it has to be refined over and over.
I think it's a great point that you made is that we do have to make some assumptions to go forward, but in order to like once we have exhausted a certain direction, sometimes we have to revisit the so-called assumptions that we had to
It's kind
make.
of like
And
alchemy with chemistry, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly. And if we kept going in that alchemy direction, we might have hit a wall and being like, okay, this is as far as we can understand. But it's because the assumptions that led us down that path weren't accurate. So you have to go back and retest those assumptions and clear it.
yeah, I mean, you become self-aware of the error after a while, you know what I mean? Or
Yeah,
someone does, not everyone, and
but
then
you kind
they
of, yeah.
put it out there to the field or whatever.
If you look in the right places on the internet, there are still people pushing on alchemy, but it doesn't look like they've made much progress to me since the 18th century.
Yeah. It's almost like and also these errors that we make that kind of shows us that there is our assumptions are getting limited, right? Like for example, with the Newtonian physics, they found out that they were making a lot of errors when they were talking about larger, like about outer space, like things weren't being explained, the assumptions were not holding true, and then that's when they realized that there's a whole field of quantum mechanics that explains it better than Newtonian physics. So it's kind of like we have to make certain assumptions to specialize, but in those errors, uh, you know, errors lies the way to greater truths, in a way of like, why are we making these mistakes? Why are these errors are still occurring? It's because our truth is limited, and truth is always limited in a way because of what you said, which is that a person can't know everything. We have to make assumptions to go forward.
I wanted to bring up two things specific to science.
Okay.
One of them being that scientists do this thing where they always assume there's a deeper reason for things, even though, eventually you're going to hit a wall and just run out of like, this is caused by this, is caused by this, is caused by this. But it actually helps us to discover more things by making this almost religious assumption that everything has a deeper reason up into infinity. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up is that there's actually like an ontological crisis in physics right now with like, I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the Copenhagen model, where it basically has to do with the fact that quantum physics, a particle, has entanglement and all these strange things that where it's not really actually existing as like a single particle, but more like a probability cloud. And so there's like a willful ignorance that physicists engage in, like under like they call it like shut up and calculate, where they don't worry about the ontological implications of the work they're doing, but they just follow the math wherever it leads in order to discover more.
Yeah, and like you said, there's this assumption that everything makes sense when you're kind of almost inventing certain things of like these connections, right? There's an assumption in science that there is truth to be found rather than it's being all rational, and that all the connections that you're making cause and effect are actual connections that exist, and you're just recognizing it rather than you trying to kind of make up relations based on whatever patterns you see.
Yeah, exactly.
We could probably also talk about how, if everyone were like, quote unquote, super rational, then we might not experiment, or we might not have crazy ideas. But the way it works is we have this huge society where, occasionally there's this weird guy who he goes off the rails, but then he somehow finds something that's better than what everyone else was, going for. So if everyone were like really averse to failing or, having error, then we might be disadvantaged. But because we are, that's what Nietzsche's point is, like, we love error because it's actually conducive to life. It's actually an advantage for us because it's, it helps us survive.
I don't know if you guys have seen that penguin meme that started in in philosophy circles, and now it's like even the White House is posting about it. It's about how like within a group of penguins, there is always going to be a couple of them that just go out into the mountains, go into new areas that and don't really follow what the general group of penguins are doing, and which is kind of funny. But that's the same kind of idea that scientists have found with bees as well. Like there are bees that you know are they're all hive mind, so they follow a certain pattern of how they should behave. But there are a few of them that don't do that, and they're like basically errors, and those errors are really what creates new patterns, right? New ideas, new ways of doing things. So it's weird how we call them errors, but they're not actually the right term in a way. They're, as Nietzsche says, they're attempters or new ways of looking at things. And in the old system, from the old system, it looks like they're mistakes because they don't fit, the patterns that are already known or fit the way of how the herd behaves at present.
Yeah, so like that penguin, it could either be an accidental result of like the nature of penguins, or it could actually have a very specific advantage in that maybe it discovers, I don't know, a new food source or a new
Yeah.
route, a travel route. Because I saw a video that said the penguin could actually easily return. It could go to the mountain and then come all the way back. So it wasn't necessarily like some weird suicidal mental illness thing. It seemed to have a somewhat of a purpose, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But here it says, to go back to the aphorism, it also says, like, you kind of have to make a lot of assumptions in order to enjoy life. And that's also true, is that the more like rationalist you become, you kind of make life boring and dry, because you're caught up in the specifics. You know, the phrasing of like, um, losing the forest for the trees. You're focusing too much on the details and kind of missing the fun of the entire picture, right?
The other
Yeah,
thing on this aphorism or whatever you want to call it is, just like he discusses the sanctas simplicitas, which is, in my opinion, like the whole point of the aphorism. But it's like, we simplify things because it makes it easier for us to communicate. There's the part where he's all talking about like, you know, there's only degrees and subtleties of gradations, but let's hope that language doesn't cast off its awkwardness and talking in degrees of opposites, because it's just so much easier to communicate that out rather than the entire fucking gradations of what you're talking about. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's easier
Another,
to talk it in terms of black and white or left and right and all that shit than it is to be like, oh, well, he's like a left leaning, kind of
mm,
right leaning centrist that, like,
mm, mm.
shit like that. It's just like, I don't know, it just gets
It,
convoluted as fuck after a while.
it's interesting is that I think it was in Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche talks about how like being being able to assume, like make vast generalizations based on very little um, data, can be seen like, oh, that's like the worst thing you could do these days because you're like stereotyping people or whatever. But back in the day, like when you're out in the wild and you're trying to see if who's an enemy or a friend, you those kind of assumptions are way more powerful, and it's very more necessary, right? Because otherwise your survival depended on it, versus you're caught in the middle of being like, oh, but what if this person is actually trying to help me? So, and you keep thinking about it and that person just kills you, right? So
Yeah.
the assumptions, m- being able to
Violence was
generalize it.
much more of a necessity in the past. So,
Exactly. So it really depends on the time frame whether or not the specificity of your assumptions is valuable or not. Some of the traits that we consider as really disgusting and so, racism and all this stuff might have been way more advantages in the past, where those kind of assumptions were necessary to survive.
Or it's like when you're walking on a trail at night and you hear a rustling in the bushes.
Exactly.
Your brain automatically thinks it's like something dangerous rather than like the more likely outcome where it's, nothing, but it led
Right.
to our
Just go ahead.
survival for it to assume that it was
Exactly.
something dangerous.
Yeah, you're gonna assume that is negative, right? That's just because you rather error that way, thinking it's something scary and it not being scary, and think it's safe, and then something kills you. Anything more about the aphorism, or should we move on?
No, that seems to cover it pretty nicely.
All right, let's go on to aphorism 25. Yeah, it's the interesting thing about this aphorism is that it talks about how truth doesn't need defending or protecting, and that it's good for us to remember, because he also goes into like how when you get into discussions with people, you're almost like, for some reason you think that you're like trying to argue in front of a jury or something, because it doesn't matter, like, to win the argument, right? It really doesn't matter, because if you're right, either you're right or you're not. Winning the argument doesn't really do much, right? And you don't have to like protect the truth. The truth will kind of is what it is, right? Whether people want to follow certain things or whatnot, um, it's to bring a little bit of Jung. I was listening to him, and it says how like when you're learning about truths, these different things, you should always like write things and whatnot to explain, to kind of understand, rather than to like try to convince people of the truth, because if you're caught up in trying to convince and there's arguing back and forth of like, oh no, this is true, that is true, it's just a waste of time, because you're not coming in the mentality of like trying to see, understand, and learn more. It's more caught up in trying to convince people, right? And it's like a lost battle already, because
I
people,
think there's a line in Zarathustra where they say it's better to own oneself in the wrong than to establish oneself in the right, especially if you are in the right. And I think that is kind of like what he's saying here.
Well, one must also remember that he's striking at his contemporaries, because in the 19th century, well, this is a very ironic statement, actually, very humorous when he's speaking about this truth, since he had a more so perspectivist view upon the truth. He doesn't even think such a concept is real, because each energy, each force in the universe has its own view of reality. And here he's talking about these people who are, as you said, wasting their time, wasting their potential, defending some ideology or some system, some made up big, the defenders of the truth, as many of them call themselves, either on the side of the religious ones or the atheists, depending. So these people who just obsess over either being extremely objective or trying to defend a religious ideal. And he says we don't need that. You should embrace the reality, or you should embrace the truth that appears to you. That well, that's not what he's saying here, but he is attacking those who do the opposite.
And it's interesting that he also argues that how poisonous it is, how crafty, how bad, how long these wars are, because you're not attacking by a means of force. So he almost like leans on the side of whichever truth prevails, should be, it's better that it's a means of force rather than just us arguing back and forth. And he talks the bottom here about philosophers kind of doing that, of like, just going back and forth arguing, because we don't really know what truth is, and everybody has their own perspective and whatnot, instead of using force to make it clear which one it is.
Yeah, what he's also saying is that, how in war, when something is done by force, you're truthful. You do what you believe, what you actually think is right. You do not have to discuss, you don't have to argue for the truth, for what is right. And he's talking about these poisonous people who deceive, manipulate, and lie with their words, defending some sort of abstract truth or trying to convince people of this truth. And the true truth, so to speak, are those who do not have to justify what they're doing. They just do by force what they think is right. Like, imagine if you're in a parliament and you have your party that has certain ideas. You say, this is what we want to do for the country. We have 60%. You won't be going around trying to debate the enemies and trying to convince them. You're just going to get through with it and just do it. It's this true action, so to speak. It's this real action. And contrary to this poisonous rationalization of truth and of discussion and of, the slimy, sleazy sort of debate culture of the 19th century.
I do think that what he says in terms of like living out your truths is almost like the test of fire, right? Of seeing which truth is actually valid versus you can argue abstractly of, in my truth is correct or my truth is correct, and you can keep arguing back and forth. And the more you don't test it with the fire, which is reality, the more it's arguing about nothing. You just fighting invisible ghosts.
Well, we can see 25 eventually devolves into people who become hermits. So it's like, these are people who take this shit to like the nth degree where they become hermits. Like, the guy in the forest where Zarathustra gets his fucking bread and water from or whatever.
Mm.
You know what I mean? The hermit in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
He makes the dead guy he's carrying eat and drink too.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, metaphor for Nietzsche. Like, when you read Ecce Homo, it talks about how Zarathustra waylaid Nietzsche on his walks or whatever, and he's talking about the personality type of Zarathustra that came over him. And you see Nietzsche is stuffed into a tree to be hidden. He's not buried or anything. And then Zarathustra wakes up in like the virgin forest, and he's that's his. In the next aphorism, and thus spoke thus spoke Zarathustra and Ecce Homo, he's talking about his experience with inspiration and everything. And I don't know, it gets all crazy, but you can read it in Ecce Homo or whatever. It's right there in the section on thus spoke Zarathustra. But anyways, these guys are like those nth degree hermits, those absolute pariahs of society. You know what I mean? So it's not just like, you do have people who waste their time on that shit, quite regularly, like me. But it's like, I'm not a hermit like Spinoza or these other guys, Giordano Bruno.
Yeah, and what is also interesting, I've just noticed, he says something like this here in this aphorism. I just read it. So he's talking about artistic curiosity and sense of humor. Nietzsche has a lot of sense of humor in his writings. What he's saying, where was it? Here, right here, below.
Which is the unfailing sign and
unfailing sign. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this sort of indignation, moral indignation. So what he's making fun of is all of these people who would have not accepted the sort of recipe that he's bringing for the problem of the death of God, because he's advocating essentially with the Übermensch for something that goes entirely against the sensitivities of the herd morality. It goes entirely against everything that was taught about compassion, about societal solidarity and all that stuff that even the monarchies were adopting. After all, at the time, a social state was being built in Germany. And here he's speaking about the stupidity of this, of these people who like to have their moral indignation. They feel, they see this ugliness of the world, of this samsara, so to speak, of this brutal meat grinder where the gazelles get ripped apart by lions, where evil capitalists rob the world, exploit the workers, and all of the other things all the awful things that are going on. After all, suffering outweighs any pleasure in the world by a lot. And he says this sort of moral indignation is just like masturbation a little bit. You're trying to make yourself feel good by saying how evil it all is, and then going and being a hermit, trying to get away from all this suffering and living for some truth, for some abstract concept, instead of just accepting the world for what it is and functioning in it, which would make you a part of the world and would make you what Nietzsche wants, the sort of artist, the sort of creator in the world. So that is what he's attacking here. These moralists, so to speak, just they halt any sort of advancement in life. They deny life, essentially. They degenerate.
What I kind of don't understand is that Zarathustra himself will like go up into the mountains for 10 years at a time before he like comes back down. So I guess,
I mean, that's just to liken him kind of in a way to Christ, you know, because Christ does the same thing at the same age, and then he comes down and starts bestowing knowledge. So,
from my perspective, I think it's kind of like you don't want to be too much like the herd, right? And I think in the later aphorisms he talks about it, like you don't want to like be cut out from the herd either, right? Because if you're not going to live life and mingle with the herd and learn from it and understand the world through with that, then you're kind of disconnecting yourself from life itself, right? So I think he's basically saying either extreme is bad. You don't want to be a member of the herd that never like processes these things and thinks and tries to push the boundaries of mankind and tries to be a bridge. And you also don't want to be a hermit who's just like staying in his cave being like, oh, I know the truth more than anybody else, and just doesn't even interact with the rest of society and is incapable of doing so.
I mean,
as the hermit says in the nature thing, you know, he's just like, oh, I got my animals now. I don't need like what good are people?
I don't think Nietzsche's against spending some time as a hermit. I think he's against his.
For sure.
Yeah.
This moral indignation, yeah.
It's also, but like he later talks about, like it's kind of the heavy burden.
He loves isolation, like what I mean? But he's just not like resigned to this like melancholy of life, you know.
Yeah, and he's attacking. I think I don't know for sure, but I think he's attacking Schopenhauer, because Schopenhauer brought these sort of Buddhistic, hermetic sort of solutions for this world. You should not perpetrate the suffering and so on. You should cut yourself off. You should cut off your desires, your pleasures, because that's the drive. That's there was this nice word, this nice Buddhist word for it, Maya, the sort of evil feminine energy that wants to seduce you into living, into participating in this evil world. And the hermit says, no, thank you. I'm enlightened. I have my morality. I know that this world is evil. I stay out of it. And this was Schopenhauer, who was a great critic of a lot of things, and who Nietzsche also was influenced by. But here he attacks these sort of people.
I guess it reminds me of the Buddhist monks, basically, of like being in their temples and cutting themselves off all desires and thinking that is life at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Nietzsche says in Twilight, I think Reason and Philosophy, I can't remember which one, but it's like, oh no, maybe it's the one on naturalism and philosophy or whatever, but it's an attack on the instincts is an attack on life in general. So
the Buddhists kind of attack the instincts by attacking desires, your inclinations. Yeah,
but they're honest. They're more honest on another way than the herd, because the herd pretends as if life wasn't suffering at all. It's all fine. Like all of the slaughterhouses where we kill billions of animals every year, the billions of cows, billions of I think it's 7 billion, or how many, someone could check how many billions of animals get slaughtered every year. That doesn't exist. And the Buddhist is more honest in the sense that he says, okay, this does exist and it's evil. Just that Nietzsche says, you're more honest, you say it exists, but I say it's good. It's we should be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So the Buddhist is superior to
he
the
says
herd.
about Buddhism that, damn, what was it? Buddhism promises nothing but fulfills everything. But like the Judeo-Christian morality system promises everything but fulfills nothing. So there's some sort of more honesty going on there with like the fulfillment aspect, you know what I mean? Like it's more life fulfilling, but it's
I'm really curious how much Nietzsche actually knew about Buddhism.
Probably
I've recently there's been a lot of
things.
There's been a lot of speculation.
There's a lot from a lot of it was from Schopenhauer, and another main text I can't recall where he got what author it was, and then it was Christian values, not necessarily Judeo-Christian values, but basically the quote was right for Cyrus.
Yeah, it wasn't like direct knowledge, I don't think.
Anything else to talk about before we move on? Okay, so now 26. What do I have on here? Let's see. Yeah, here, this is kind of what I was referring to, how like Nietzsche talks about how you shouldn't hide away from the majority. It might cause distress, disgust, gloominess, loneliness, but that's the price of having elevated taste. And if you avoid it, you're not predestined or made for knowledge. And if you're up for it, then the majority, and he goes into the whole line of the majority is more interesting than the exception. Yeah. This one. The devil take my good taste, but the rule is more interesting than the exception, than myself, the exception. So it's interesting how like you might have, especially Nietzsche here, might have good ability to introspect and know understand and have good insight into these things, but at the same time, you don't want to cut yourself from the world, essentially, because how the herd works, as much as you might dislike it and think that it's beneath you and all the stuff, that is more interesting than ourselves, or quote unquote the exceptions of people who like to step back and look at what's happening. And it's almost like burden of the of the person, like of the philosopher, to kind of mingle with the general public, knowing that he's not going to convince them, they're not going to understand him, but he's at the same time not to be completely removed from them. So kind of having to bear.
You want to be. What's great in man is that he's a bridge, right? So you don't want to be completely disconnected from society. You know what I mean? When you're cut off, you're not bridging anything at that point. You're just your own bubble, your own little world. And once we get to 200, you're going to see that the greatest types and the majority types are actually complementary to the same cause. So it's when the majority type find repose within the higher types' values. So that's why you got to be connected with the herd if you want to be great or whatever. And you got to remember, this is all in lieu of greatness. This is like, you don't have to be oh, I'm gonna be this great life changing mother. You know what I mean? Like, if your fucking life just, just plays out the way that it is, like that's what happens with, that's what Nietzsche talks about his own life. It just played out the way that it was. I never really struggled at anything. I wasn't a heroic nature, this and that, fucking. So it's just kind of like you do what you do and it plays out the way that it is, but
it's interesting here that he says, like, in parentheses, all contact is bad contact except with one's equals, but also then talks about the long and serious study of the average man. All this self-overcoming familiarity and bad contact. This is a necessary part of the life history of every philosopher. So even though you recognize that the bad contact isn't good to have, it's something that you have to kind of necessarily work with as well.
Well, not only that, you may see these actions and other people that you may not necessarily see in yourself at first. You know what I mean? You may think you're this whatever type, but then you start seeing these same actions in these other people, and then you're like, oh wait, well, maybe I should examine this more closely in myself or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's what Nietzsche says here. Those who simply recognize the animal, the commonplace, and the rule in themselves. So you see that there is herd mentality in yourself as well, right? So and that's sometimes the issue, is that people who consider themselves as like they're almost egoists, of being like, oh, I'm better than everybody else, but they refuse to see that the same thing is in them as well, right? And
yeah, and then I mean that's when they just start getting into idealism. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but that's interesting to. It's also interesting how, like, by studying the herd, you also understand how you're different from it, right? So you recognize what makes you different, how are you, and why you need to be different, right? It's kind of clarifies. It's almost like yin and yang, right? The opposite makes yourself sharper, like you recognize by almost
deeper roots.
Yeah.
Support a higher growth or whatever, that sort of thing.
And also a little bit of Hegelian, like your opposite kind of makes yourself look sharper.
Well, again, the sanctas simplicitas is right there. It's just like, even though you're just saying opposite, it's, you can still imagine it in the degrees of gradation rather than just, what I'm saying? So as long as you think in terms of multiplicity, when you utilize the words opposite, then you're golden.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Good point.
Because I can't remember which aphorism he says it, but Nietzsche says thinking in terms of multiplicity is a sign of, higher intellect when, something's presented in terms of being or whatever, and you're thinking, or being in unity, and you're thinking in terms of becoming and multiplicity rather than the being and the unity that the words present or whatever.
Yeah. What do you guys think about this part of the aphorism? It happens more frequently, has been hinted, that a scientific head is placed on an ape's body. It goes about by no means rare, especially when doctors and physiologists of morality. How do you guys digest this? I was kind of not fully understanding it, so.
It's Nietzsche's humor. It's a sort of, in the German it sounds more so humorous. What he's speaking about here is essentially he isn't trying to tell us with these aphorisms how we're supposed to live our life or how things are necessarily. Here he is just taking a bite at these physiologists of morality that have the same drive. So they're essentially a stomach with a head, with an or how does he say it? A scientific head on an ape's body. Their body has the same needs, the same instincts these hunger, sexual lust, vanity, as these as animals, and the soul, the base soul, as he says, is no. The soul still gets tainted by the needs of the body, even if they see themselves as these thinkers. Their soul is still base, and they will. And how he speaks early, he speaks about this French Abbe or Abbe Ferdinand Galliani, maybe no.
Abbe Galliani.
Yeah, in
writes
Paris.
the book Della Moneta.
One of the most clear thinkers, he says, but a filthy man, a filthy human. So what he's essentially making fun of these people who want to be these clean, moral physiologists of morality, and they essentially are the same. He's just calling them out. They're just as much part. It's this Platonic sort of idea that our soul is separate from the body. We have the world of ideas. We have the world of mathematics that we can explore with our super heads. And he says these scientific heads of rationality, they're just as much part of a body, of an ape's body, even just as any other.
Okay, that makes sense. Anything else anybody want to talk about with the Aphorism 26 before we move on?
Yeah, I'll talk about that Galliani guy. There's a really cool quote in the Will to Power about that guy where Nietzsche he quotes him. I'm going to pull it up real quick and read it out. It's
please do. I'm interested.
It's number 133. Like the whole thing's in French, but the translation is he's quoting Galliani, who said, "Foresight is the cause of Europe's present wars. If one would take pain to foresee nothing, the whole world would be tranquil, and I do not believe that one would be worse off for not waging war." And then Nietzsche says to that, "Since I do not by any means share the unwarlike views of my friend Galliani, I am not afraid of predicting a few things and thus possibly of conjuring up the cause of wars. A tremendous stock-taking after the most terrible earthquake with new questions." So Nietzsche says, yeah, this guy's right. If we predict things, we might act in response to that and we start going to war. And which was, that was reasonable. But then his morality said, well, maybe we should stop doing that. And Nietzsche's response is, maybe we should cause wars. I don't care. I'm going to predict a few things. I don't like when he did with socialism, right? He said, maybe it's a good thing if we have a socialist country and just see what happens, basically. The experiment, so we could observe the results of it.
Totally unrelated, well, mostly unrelated, but totally unrelated to the passage when you were talking about that Will to Power quote, which I'll have to revisit, so thanks for bringing that up. But there is another place where actually Nietzsche does advocate for global de-armament and pacifism.
If you find it, feel free to share in the book discussion. I'd like to see.
Wait.
Sure.
Do you mean de-arming of the individuals or like nations?
I think he's more speaking in the terms of like war, like between maybe not nation states, but just like war as we understand war, and not necessarily individuals. But that the ultimate conclusion is pacifism. So take it what you will with an individual or like say a larger regional entity. But I was just thinking, like you brought that up, and I was like, oh, that's crazy. He had like a quote that is seemingly anyway, and I imagine there's some nuances as Nietzsche does, but seemingly opposite. Speaking about these kinds of claims that you brought up from Will to Power 133.
Yeah, but you might be talking
I'll
about
find it, and I'll put it in book discussion later.
Disarming people, maybe talking about disarming the state.
Well, also he specifically was trying to predict wars for the 20th century, which did happen. So maybe there's a timeline difference with what you're talking about, Hospice. Maybe he was talking about like a later stage, but he, like for socialism, for example, he was talking about the 20th century. He was saying, yeah, there's probably going to be some wars, which turned out to be true. So you might be talking about, he might have said something different for like way later in the future. I'm not sure.
He was a total anti-pacifist in all of his writings. He
Yeah,
always said that
or
war is
society.
this most life-affirming, life-enhancing thing. We see that sort of thought also with Ernst Jünger. Maybe some of you know Ernst Jünger. War as a sort of artistic expression, because he also said it earlier with the force thing in the last aphorism. In war, there is not this fakeness of society, of debates, of manipulation, but in war, you just reveal your true nature. You reveal your heroism, your cowardice, your loyalty. And Nietzsche was a total anti-pacifist. He saw it as this flabby, weak thing that he made fun of the pacifists. Maybe it was an ironical statement. He often writes ironically. He says some of the things in that. Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain amount of obliteration though, because like he talks about it in Genealogy of Morals 10, where it's like, the sign of the slave is like one person who wants to completely obliterate their enemy, whereas, the noble type will just win the battle but not try to completely, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna stab this guy 100 times or whatever, you know what I mean?
What that made me think of was I just finished reading John Julius Norwich's History of Venice, and I know that Nietzsche was pretty enamored of the Italian city-states during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, second after the Greeks. And according to Norwich, a lot of their wars were really more like sort of large chess games, because the condottieri who were doing the fighting didn't primarily just wanted to string things out to make more money. So they would just perpetually maneuver for position without ever actually engaging. Sorry, I don't know where I was going with that.
No, but it kind of makes sense with how wars were fought after a while, you know what I mean? Like, like it was a chessboard, like why did the British think that it was a good idea to fight America and like their formation style versus guerrilla warfare? You know what I mean? It's just like, it wasn't a smart move on their behalf, in my opinion. But it's like that whole style of fighting, it was like, there's like a certain, it wasn't really about killing the troops. It was about, outmaneuvering, like, hey, like, cause they were respecting the troops you know what I mean? It was kind of like, once you're outmaneuvered and all that shit, then you like surrender, and then, you know what I mean? It wasn't like unless if it came to like, the troop loss was like the very last thing that was supposed to happen in those situations.
Yeah.
That's interesting how war changed. But talking about these city-states, these Italian republics, so to speak, these republican city-states that were warlike, but also the ancient Greek states, he admires them as this high culture. And one of the very important aspects of high culture is war. It is this approval of war as this life-affirming thing. When you see these Greek statues, these muscles, these perfect proportions, what essentially this Greek statue is.
Activa, he talks about it.
Yeah, and this is a warrior that will win wars. Is essentially the message.
All of their terms for happiness were not like, they were completely married to terms of activity. So it was like, activity equals happiness in the ancient Grecan constellation of thought. And it wasn't until the Sabbath became holy that the rest became like desired, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
Ready to go on to 27?
And the inner character of all energy is will to power. So, and that's either stored energy or kinetic, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
All right. Guys ready to go on to the 27th aphorism?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. the short one, I didn't get a lot out of it.
Nietzsche's good at making himself hard to understand.
Yeah. It's
That's pretty much what it is. But I mean, some people think fast, some people think slow. You know, it's like, yeah, that's true. Some people are fast, some people are slow. They think slow. They have to ruminate on things for a while. Or some people are just like, yeah, I got it. You know, go, 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 go.
Yeah, like he's talking about 3 different rivers. The first is like the river Ganges, which is fast moving.
Yeah.
Then the second one is like slow turtle kind of pace. And then the final is like a frog haphazardly jumping around. And he says that he like speaks in aphoristic terms to kind of filter out people who are too slow or can't keep up with him, because he wants to engage those who are fast like him, because when there's a mismatch of speeds, I think that it leads to misunderstandings and like people not quite understanding what he's trying to say. And then also like the next aphorism talks about tempo in terms of language, but that's what I got out of it.
In Hath 2, I think it's like 124 or 127 or something, but he talks about aphorisms for his friends are great because it's like you can see who really understands you and who doesn't. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what he's talking about here too. Like, oh, the good friends, but it's like, you know, they try to pretend like they're good friends, but they don't really know what the fuck you're even talking about half the time.
Exactly.
This is a kind of tangent, but the other day I was thinking about one of the cool things about writing a book of aphorisms is that everyone who reads that book, they're basically forced to read all sorts of things that they might not normally be interested in. Like normally a book has very distinct chapters and people know what they're going to read. If they don't like something, they either will skip the chapter, they probably wouldn't even buy the book in the first place. But Nietzsche, he has so many different ideas, some of them offensive, and he's basically forcing people to just read all of it. Even if they don't understand it at first, he's putting it there and you can't really help but to see it. So I think it's kind of funny.
It is nice like that.
I didn't think of it that way, but his entire aphorism style itself is like making it difficult for people to just sum him up, or like, oh, this book is about this, you know, or that book is about this.
Like he says, I aim to write however many, like in 2 lines or in 2 sentences, what other philosophers would write in like
10 books,
couple pages or some bullshit, or like a chapter for their book or whatever. You know what I mean? Some bullshit like that.
Compressed. Everything
honestly,
compressed.
He has a great point, because I feel like I've
so
read
much
books
and all of his fucking aphorisms, just bam, just they're all fucking bangers, just one after the fucking other, dude. Especially in BGE, at least.
Honestly, each one of these aphorisms can be turned into an entire book these days, right? Like, we're literally taking forever just talk about these things because there's so much to go into. And that's what modern day books are, basically one idea just stretched over like 200, 300 pages of the same one concept, you know? But,
absolutely.
But you guys say?
I think,
right. Yeah, sometimes they're just like 100 pages nowadays.
Yeah.
I think one thing he was also afraid of is that his works would be something of like the marketplace, where everybody's just like yapping out his ideas and they begin to like lose all meaning in that way. But since like he moves so fast and it's so difficult to understand, that it requires like a level of sacrifice, I guess, or just like,
yeah, it's a filter basically.
Yeah. So it keeps his ideas in the hands of those who are, I guess, like are willing to follow him up the mountain. If you want,
like Peter Gast, for example.
Yeah.
For
the interesting, however, is that Nietzsche's ideas definitely have influenced our current age in different forms. Whether it's with deconstructionism or like even the modern day ideas. I mean, even influencing Heidegger and influencing Nazis and all this stuff. There's
Zionism as well.
One way or another.
Yeah.
I think even like feminism, ironically, because it wouldn't be possible without perspectivism. Like seeing, like not only understanding that men want the world this way, and they'll be able to have it their way, but they also need to consider the perspective of women, and they took that and ran with it, and I think that's like a lot of the foundation of feminism.
Yeah, modern day feminism.
Because feminists already existed back then. He writes about them in Ecce Homo. He attacks feminism.
Yes, but he's attacking the feminism that declares woman as such, not woman as, self-determined or whatever. Woman from her own perspective, basically.
He would generally reject all of these mass movements, which came from postmodernism. Yes, Foucault also was Foucault, and
I mean, Nietzsche definitely has a very like, hey, this is what the feminine is. He says it himself. He's the first psychologist of the eternally feminine, and that's because he has a very specific idea of what the feminine is, and a very specific idea of what the masculine is. But
yeah, from Schopenhauer. He took the Schopenhauerian definition of the feminine being the chaotic, the unbound, the sort of
Dionysian, that's
the last student of Dionysian.
Yeah.
He just says that it's good. He says the opposite of Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer, it's this evil spirit, and the masculine is the good, the ordered. And he says the opposite. He says you're an incel. You're a loser. The feminine is actually good. We need to become brutal.
Exactly.
And it's chaotic, and we need to embrace that part of our culture.
Well, we just shouldn't try to extirpate it out, like we still need to embrace the, it's like the Apollonian grew out of the Dionysian, and that's what like tragedy, the greatest art of the both is, what I mean? It's like the equal parts Apollonian and Dionysian is created, or it allowed tragedy to exist or whatever. So
I'm interested in that aphorism of regarding feminists from Ecce Homo. If you find
I will look for it.
If you find it, I'm curious.
I mean, it's probably, I think it's like section 3.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact.
Yeah, that should be fine. I'm just
maybe
curious.
Chapter 3. I think it's just like a page or two.
Okay. All right.
It's why I think it's in Why I Write So Excellent Books. I have the German version. I'm gonna.
Yeah, if you find it, I'll search it as well. That's fine. All right. On to the next one. Aphorism 28. All right. Yeah, the main idea that I was. What I got out of it was, as you mentioned, Vic, about the tempo of the style, how like certain things in translation, cannot be translated. And one clear thing is the tempo, and then he goes into other things that can't quite be explained in the same way. And we know that.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that we know that Kaufman tries to stay true to things, but at the same time, Kaufman translation had to be almost had to like
sterilized the sing-song writing of the dithyramb of Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Exactly. So even there, you see, like, depending on your audience and whatnot, you have to kind of change as well.
Real quick before you guys go into commentary on the next aphorism, I found that quote that I was thinking about when I was mentioning like something like pacifism or disarmament. I was misremembering it slightly, but the specificity about countries in it I found to be apt. I'll put it in book discussion in a little bit.
All right.
And I found
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add one thing about this aphorism real quick. That he talks about that he kind of dislikes his own language of German, and it lends itself to like that slower pace that you kind of see with Kant, kind of writing very long books and moving very slow and systematically, versus like when he reads Greek, it's much faster, quick tempo, doesn't like lollygag as much. So, and he says it's almost impossible to capture that when translating from ancient Greek to German.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, even just look at some of the translation lengths of the different books. You know, it's like, damn, dude, like the Spanish version of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, way shorter than the fucking German version.
What did they take out, right?
Well, it's not even what they took out, it's just how fast the language is spoken compared to, you know? Like some languages are just rapid fire, whereas other languages are kind of slow and guttural.
Interesting. Yeah. Anything else to add?
You can send the quote about these emancipation, about feminism, so to speak, into the chats. I found it here.
Yeah,
it's in the fifth aphorism of why I write such good books. Here we go. Oh, it says message text. Maybe this way. Oh, this is just a part of it. You may take a look.
Okay, you've shared it in sharing it in book discussions.
Generally, and here in the chat of the voice chat, but I can also put it in book.
Yeah, yeah, you can put it in both in case other people can also read and add to it if they want to.
All right.
Ready for the next one, guys? 29. Okay. What did I write? Let's see. Yeah, he talks about the difficulty of, I guess, kind of separating yourself, kind of going your own way, and almost like it's interesting how like the comprehension of men that they can neither feel it or sympathize, which is one of the harder parts, I guess, is like you can't even explain it to them because they have no way of like relating or connecting with it. So even if you try to connect with them, and they simply can't, they don't understand why it's difficult or what you're talking about, and he cannot go back any longer, nor can he go back to the pity of men. Like you're basically alone because you can't be understood. And daring to the point of recklessness. Basically, that's the general idea behind the aphorism.
Yeah, and imagine the protected ones in society. So essentially, women and children, they have the pity, or those oppressed ones, the victims, the ones who are in the lowest parts of society. You know how it works. So this pity, he also views it as a sort of sin, pity as a sin, a bad motivator, so to speak, instead of the overflow. And here he speaks about the independent, like hawks, like birds that fly far into the skies and see the objects much clearer over the clouds. And they can go back now and be pitied when they fail. When they fail, all of these resentful herd will look down on them. It's a bit like the man who in modern society, this is a bit of an incel meme or a little bit of a meme. No one pities the man for his failures. Everyone thinks, oh, the poor single mother and all of that. But the man who has to take responsibility, who is independent, who is expected to be independent and strong and face many of the challenges alone, he won't be able to rely on any pity, nor, well, he cannot go back to being a child.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what many people want.
I think, like, when you walk your own path in life, a lot of times people, like, especially if you're like stumbling or making mistakes as you go along, people will kind of mock you or like look at you with ridicule, I guess, and more like wanting you to fail, more so than they will like look at you with pity or like be like, oh, or try to like help you along your way, because I think it's a threat to the herd, I guess, when somebody does decide to break off and do their own thing.
Yeah, it's an instinct to want to have the pity for these weaker ones. Can see in this victim mentality of today, everyone wants to be part of an identity group that is pitied, that is protected, and the independent guy will not go and say, "Oh, I belong to this oppressed group. I'm this and that," or I'm a poor guy. He has to just embrace life with all of its struggle, and also he will never be able to rely on any help of the herd. So it's something that he's also speaking. We must remember, this is the time, the late 19th century, and the liberals at the time are speaking that everyone deserves freedom and independence. The Liberal Party led by Virchow in Prussia and Germany, all of these extreme individualists that want this individualism for everyone, essentially these rights for everyone.
Yeah, that's because like people like Locke and whatnot, they were like, oh, society's made up of individuals, but it's like, no, dude, society was always like individuals. Nietzsche argues, like, Griffinhide has a fucking banger quote from a Nietzsche fragment in here. I'll look it up, but it's about, individuals come from society. Society exists first. Like the social unit exists first before the individual. So the individual steps outside of the social unit, basically. It's the differentiation out of the social unit rather than the social unit. Yeah. It's like society's first, or the social unit's first, and then the individual. So you know what I mean. So
a fun little
not the other way around.
Sorry about that. It was just a fun little note that from Nietzsche. I can't remember where the passage is, but he says like the smallest social unit is the family. He doesn't say the individual. He says the family is.
Yeah, of course.
That's a very interesting perspective of like, how an individual isn't part of that society in a way. He's kind of like, it's when you separate out of it.
The individual is only for the few. It's only for the great men, for those who, for the exception, those who have to be educated in this way that Nietzsche proposes to take their excellence, their greatness, and to drive humanity forward. It will always be the very few. And if you try to make this for the masses, if you try to elevate all of the masses into this idea of making them into these citizens who think of it, they'll just create what we call this modern liberal democracy, which is slop.
You could even anyways, because it's like, you can't pretend a lower quantum of strength is a higher quantum of strength anyways. Nietzsche says it's preposterous, so.
But we do that. We do that. Look at education.
I know, I know. I'm just saying, it's just like,
it's idiotic.
It's basically what makes mankind weak.
Look at how everyone is so happy about the literacy rate. Oh, the education is so great. Everyone has access to it. Well, maybe it's obligatory. Everyone has to go through it, but nobody looks at the quality and compares it to earlier ages. The quality has gone down drastically in the 19th century and the 20th century, because when you have to do something for the masses, you have to lower the quality, you have to lower the demands from the pupils. If you look at how in ancient Greece,
it was phased in. Like at least in America, the education system was phased in, and like over 70 years, because all the states had to agree on it, and then it became a a national thing after all the states agreed on it, and then but it was all like vocational training at that point in time, because you already had these 12-year-olds, these 8-year-olds, 15-year-olds working in jobs anyways, because that's just the way it was back then.
I'm not actually
So
sure. I'm not actually sure that the quality of of education has declined. Like, I know it's popular to point to things like, oh, Harvard used to expect you to know Latin before you could come in, but like the on the other hand, they did not used to expect you to have taken AP Physics, and I read I spent some time like reading up on the history of universities, and one of the main conclusions I came away with is that students have always been little shits, and
yeah,
I can attest. I am very much a little shit.
and like at least these days they mostly no longer get into sword fights with each other.
That was good. That was good. The sword fight was an element of this chivalric spirit, so to speak, of this challenging. Nietzsche doesn't tell us with these books, oh yes, create a peaceful functioning society that will be stable and good. He is totally counterintuitive. He also isn't a supporter of the sciences, so to speak, because you say, oh yes, physics has advanced. That's true. He's an enemy of this as well. He's an enemy of those who, through the glass, want to peek into the outer rims of the universe and find out that Earth is just a little speck. He wants life-affirming education. He wants the education to teach these students how to be warriors, how to be musicians, artists, like in the ancient Greek education, make them into men. And universities today don't do that at all. They do not care at all about the development of these students, about their emotional, cultural development. They do not give a damn. They just take exams. They have a big bureaucracy right now that is expanding and expanding, as you know. There's this big problem in Harvard and Oxford and all of these places that this managerial class is taking over, is taking control. That's of course another issue. But as we can see, Nietzsche was totally right in this. This total complication of the interior, a good organism that expands, or the energy. I saw that earlier in one of the posts explaining his epistemology. An energy essentially that is healthy expands outward and simplifies inward. It becomes more frank, more direct. And we're doing the opposite. We are shrinking as Europe, let's say, or as the West, and we're complicating our systems more and more and more and more with all of these bureaucracies, with all of these things, trying to creating problems that we then try to heroically solve. And this is what Nietzsche foresaw.
You made a couple of points there, not all of which I feel equipped to respond to. So I'm only going to pick a few of them, if that's okay. I'm not sure that the universities ever tried to do what you're describing. Like there's like a very brief period in like around 1300 where they were more like guilds of teachers than anything else. But for almost their entire history, they have been basically what they are now. They are state-operated degree factories. And the idea that they should be anything else was a very late invention. But beyond that, I also sort of take issue with the idea that Nietzsche was opposed to science. Like he problematizes the question of, is knowledge actually valuable? And that but he never actually says, no, it isn't. He says we shouldn't do things solely for the sake of knowledge.
And not only that, I mean, he says his will to power, it's mostly to correct. It's not to discount the mechanistic world, but it's to, put it in a different perspective, to where like the perspectives can't be seen as a cause, and whether the perspective isn't causa sui. So the will to power, actually, when you utilize science through the notion of will to power, it corrects for this like fucked up perception of like
will to truth, the objective will to truth.
Yeah, basically.
Also, as one of the guys said, contrary to the belief that university standards have lowered and etc., and because to educate the masses, the elites are getting oppressed as well. This is completely false, in my opinion, because the elites send their children to the best schools still, where only elites are, and then they all go to Oxford and Harvard, etc., where only really elites are. A lot of them know Latin, a lot of those who go to law school, etc. So I don't think that's really true. The standard is still in elites. It's just the poor people think, the lower castes, that things have changed, which they have not. Not at all.
But that's not the point of Nietzsche. Nietzsche doesn't advocate simply for elites. Elites always exist. Mm-hmm. He would say about these current elites that they are going in the wrong direction.
What wrong direction? You spoke about
yes.
You spoke about dueling. You spoke about sports. The founder of Oracle takes part in many kinds of deals. Mark Zuckerberg as well does judo and shit like that.
That was more so a mention, but the point is, it is not a life-affirming education. It is not an education that is trying to create great men. It is not what it is. It is, as you said so often in talks, that it's about this networking, about getting to know each other, building these comfy elites of innovators, and I don't know what kind of elites you're talking about, but they're not the elites that Nietzsche envisioned at all. We are talking about the ancient Greek education, and that did. Look at how ancient Greek aristocrats were educated, or how aristocrats in the 18th century were still educated in the classics, in physical education, in instruments. All of that is impossible today. It is not possible to bring this sort of education to the masses.
Well, what you're saying is basically you want a Renaissance man kind of education where you're basically taught everything of something. I think maybe liberal arts universities in America kind of fulfill that, but also you still have many universities in America, like the Ivy Leagues, which focus on sports, which focus on this vital aspect, very much so.
And many of those 18th century aristocrats you're talking about, they did not go to universities. Like Britain was a little bit of an exception with Oxford and Cambridge, but on the continent, like for up until the late 19th century, it would be very unusual for a nobleman. Like they might go to university and hang out for a year or two, but they weren't going to get a degree, and they would actually be looked down on for getting a degree. Like, why are you doing that? Do you think you need to earn a living? And they had their own noble schools. Like I don't remember what. I haven't yet been able to actually find out much about these institutions, but they had their own totally separate educational institutions.
Exactly. These educational institutions are the ones that are valuable, not the universities.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything more to share about 29, or can we move on to 30? All right. So aphorism 30. Yeah, kind of similar to what we were getting into. But he talks about how, the highest insights should sound like vile to others who are not used to or predestined to hear them. And he talks about the difference between exoteric thinking and esoteric thinking. And about how what is nourishment for higher men is also poison for inferior men. And let's see what else. And seeing things from great heights where things stop looking tragic. And another interesting point was about when he talks about books, about how there's books for low and high souls, and the low books are dangerous, and the high books are a call to the bravest, to their courage. and the books for all smell like the small people that cling to them. Yeah. Foul-smelling books. Which is the thing is like I think these days people have a obsession with saying, oh, look at all the books that I read and whatnot, and if you look at their books, it's garbage books, so it's and I think Schopenhauer also kind of pointed out how like it's some books shouldn't have been written at all because they're kind of like they're degenerating books. Just because you're reading doesn't mean that you're.
Nietzsche has an aphorism that's like fucking, the more people that learn reading and writing ruin reading and writing that way, like by spreading it to the masses.
Yeah.
Because, then they're just producing all this filth, just lesser shit,
Yeah. I mean, it kind of opens up to people who are, incredible geniuses that can write books and their books can reach the masses. If I remember correctly, Nietzsche itself started writing because he was disgusted by the kind of information that was out there. So it can also, in that sense.
Some of his letters, he says, his one moral is mihi ipsi scripsi, which is to write for myself.
Yeah. So that exactly is also the point. It's like it kind of brought him out to write all these things because he saw the kind of things that there were, and he also wanted to write for himself. So it's interesting how like it matters what you read rather than, and it might also go into philosophy.
Quality over quantity, I guess. Or,
yeah.
Especially specific to what you're interested in, your passions or whatever, you know what I mean? Rather than just spreading out all over the fucking place.
Yeah, and there's people have this obsession of I'm going to read 200 books in a year or whatever. They have like these set goals that they set, but they're all reading trash books.
Plow through a bunch of slop.
Yeah, and they think that they're improving themselves by just reading shit.
I think like a lot of times when people open a book, they want the experience to be like warm and fuzzies when they like understand the pages and like something that is like a comforting experience. But I think a lot of times when you're reading something really profound, it actually has the opposite effect where it makes you feel very unsettled and maybe even angry. And so like I think this is why a lot of people are adverse to philosophy, is because it's not meant to be something that makes you feel good. It's meant to like upset you and challenge you and throw you off base and be a frankly difficult experience.
And
kind of shake you out of your complacency,
Yeah, and it's in no way a light read, right? Like I've looked at some of those books, and sometimes you can like glance over a couple of pages and just know exactly what is going on in that scenario because there's not much like meat to it in a sense, right? It's just like a storyline or whatnot with like general conversations and whatnot versus like each aphorism here, each paragraph here is just so dense and there's so many interpretations.
I've definitely felt that before where it's just like fluff details about something to get to one minor point or like one major point even, but it's like, an hour long fucking discussion or some shit, and it's like, the fuck is going on here, dude? Like, do we really need that much fucking shit like on this one point, You find that a lot in like sales like videos, like how to get better at sales and shit, because they try to wrap you in, like rope, you know what I mean? Like they try to rope you in themselves.
And it's always interesting when you like ask yourself like, okay, summarize what they said in the video, and you'll come up with like one possible good thing that was in that 20-minute or 30-minute video. You're just like, what a waste of time,
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So we'll call it for today, and we'll continue another time. But I like the pace we're going at. It's good.